Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 53rd class, this class on the Ridvan Festival, or the 12 days of Ridvan, which mark the proclamation of Baha'u'llah. The obvious things about this event you're probably aware of, but let me begin the slides by showing you some things that are most important to me insofar as things I didn't particularly know before I prepared this class for you, or didn't know as well or had forgotten about. So let's simply begin by my sharing the screen. And hold on a minute. And there. So we begin with the Ridvan Declaration of Baha'u'llah, the climax of the Baghdad period. Now, of course, this is an important date in Baha'i history because, first of all, it is the open declaration of Baha'u'llah that he is the promised one foretold by the Bab and for whom the entire religion of the Bab was preparing mankind. Even though many of the near ones to Baha'u'llah had already surmised that he was indeed the him whom God will make manifest. So this is a very important event for that reason alone. But let me point out some of the other obvious points that make this such an important festival. First of all, it is, as I said, the official statement of his station. Secondly, now his orders, commands, and guidance have official and authoritative weight in the community. Now, it already had assumed such weight insofar as the community was concerned, the believers were concerned, but now it had the authority of his being recognized as a manifestation of God and not simply a nominal leader of the community in Baghdad. And of course, this would, needless to say, the word got back to Persia and the Babis in Persia, though not right away. And we'll look at that in a later class, because he intended to send a number of important teachers and believers back to Persia to convey this information to them and to teach them how the writings of the Bab pointed towards Baha'u'llah. The Tablet of Ahmad is one example of that. This is what Ahmad was being asked to do in the Tablet of Ahmad, was to go back to Persia and to teach the believers about Baha'u'llah's position and fulfilling the prophecy of the Bab. It also, needless to say, probably came as a great shock to Mirza Yahya, as we will discover, because now his position as nominee was in effect no longer of any importance, because the position of nominee was simply to take care of the faith until the appearance of him whom God will make manifest. He hadn't done it, but he still had the honor and, for him, in his point of view, the authority to do it. So even though he didn't do what he was supposed to, he felt himself to be a person of importance. Fourth, the next stage in his mission then after this was obviously to announce the same information to the world at large. And of course, this he will do once he finishes his journey to Constantinople, and then his 5 months or so in Constantinople, and in Adrianople, he begins to write to the rulers, the leaders, the religious leaders and political leaders of the world. The import of it is also indicated by the fact that 3 of the holy days on which work is, of the 9 holy days on which work is to be suspended in the Baha'i calendar, are the 3 important days of the Festival of Ridvan, and that's the first day, the 9th day, and the 12th day, and we'll look tonight at what those 3 days represent, what happened on those days. Why do we know so little about it? I mean, we know something about it, and of course, we observe those 3 days, and we read the writings that deal with the importance of this date. But the Guardian himself says that we really don't have much information about the exact details, and this is a quote from the Guardian. Of the exact circumstances attending that epoch-making declaration, we alas are but scantily informed. The words Baha'u'llah actually uttered on that occasion, the manner of his declaration, the reaction it produced, its impact on Mirza Yahya, the identity of those who were privileged to hear him, are shrouded in an obscurity which future historians will find it difficult to penetrate. The fragmentary description left to posterity by his chronicler Nabil is one of the very few authentic records we possess of the memorable days he spent in that garden. And again, I remind you, this is the 2nd volume of Nabil, which is as yet not translated into English, though we have many of the important statements translated in by the Guardian, and also more importantly for our purposes in studying the life of Baha'u'llah in Balyuzi's book. What happened between the revelation of the Tablet of the Holy Mariner that we discussed last week, in which the foreboding of future difficulties was symbolically revealed, and the leaving of the Most Great House in Baghdad to go to the Garden of Ridvan is interesting to understand. And this is one of the things that I learned more about than I had thought about before. And that is, for me, after the revealing of the Tablet of the Holy Mariner, we then go to the Festival of Ridvan, but a lot had to take place in between that time. So what happened? Well, this is part of the description. This is also by the Guardian. A concourse of people of both sexes. Now, this is not during the Festival of Ridvan. This is in visiting Baha'u'llah once it became known to the public at large that he was to be, we'll say, invited to see the Sultan in Constantinople. Of course, he was being exiled, even though it was in the form of the sort of veiled form of an invitation. A concourse of people of both sexes of every age, comprising friends and strangers, Arabs, Kurds, Persians, notables and clerics, officials and merchants, as well as many of the lower classes, the poor, the orphan, the outcast, some surprised, others heartbroken, many tearful and apprehensive, a few impelled by curiosity or secret satisfaction, thronged the approaches of his house, eager to catch a final glimpse of one who for a decade had through precept and example exercised so potent an influence on so large a number of the heterogeneous inhabitants of that city, of Baghdad. So again, these people don't know yet. In other words, this is prior to the Ridvan announcement. So they're visiting him because he has become such a heroic and sage figure in Baghdad. Remember, as soon as he came back from Suleymania, he had visitors from Kurdistan, Sufis and so on, coming to ask him questions because his reputation quickly spread not only throughout Kurdistan, but throughout Baghdad as well. And so over the years of edification of the Babi community and teaching them, he had a great influence on the city. So you can imagine the same sort of crowd you see in the pictures carrying the casket of Abdul Baha on the streets up to the shrine of the Bab. Is this probably the same sort of crowd, a mixture of peoples of every religious belief and rank came to visit Baha'u'llah one last time. And continuing this narration from The Guardian, Akarida also described the constant stream of people who came each day from Baghdad to visit Baha'u'llah, who could not tolerate being parted from him, the people who could not. Food, according to Akarida, was brought from the house of Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, where his family was still in residence, and also from the house of Mirza Musani Jawahiri. Namik Pasha himself, the governor, came one day and offered to provide Baha'u'llah with whatever he required for the journey and asked to be forgiven for what had occurred. And you'll remember in previous classes that he had concealed this mandate for 4 different letters, as I recall. I forget whether it was the 4th or the 5th one that he finally had to tell Baha'u'llah what was being ordained. Baha'u'llah assured him that they had all they needed. And as Namik Pasha insisted on being of some service, Baha'u'llah said, "Be considerate to my friends and treat them kindly." The Wali gave his word to this, and he also wrote a letter addressed to the officials on the way to Istanbul, instructing them to provide the travelers with all necessities, and entrusted this document to the officer who was detailed to accompany them. Alex, somebody's mic is on, maybe yours. Then another thing that went on was preparation for the journey. Now, this was something I didn't think of, and that is that they didn't just suddenly take off. They had to get horses, donkeys and such to carry. They had to make the howdahs and even make clothing. 27 days after that mournful tablet had been so unexpectedly revealed by Baha'u'llah, and that's the tablet of the Holy Mariner that we studied last class, and the fateful communication presaging his departure to Constantinople had been delivered into his hands. On a Wednesday afternoon, April the 27th, 1863, 31 days after Nowruz, he set forth on the first stage of his 4-month journey to the capital of the Ottoman Empire. That historic day, forever after designated as the first day of Ridvan festival, the culmination of innumerable farewell visits which friends and acquaintances of every class and denomination had been paying him, was one the like of which the inhabitants of Baghdad had rarely beheld. So Baha'u'llah's arrives at the Garden of Ridvan, and this is, of course, the first day that is commemorated. The first day of Ridvan is a holy day. Leaving for the last time amidst weeping and lamentation, his most holy habitation, that's the most great house, which is a place of pilgrimage, a very important one, even though it has since been destroyed. It will be rebuilt when the time is appropriate. Out of which had gone forth the breath of the All-Glorious, and from which had poured forth in ceaseless strains the melody of the All-Merciful, and dispensing on his way with a lavish hand a last alms to the poor he had so faithfully befriended, and uttering words of comfort to the disconsolate who besought him on every stride, he at length reached the banks of the river, and was ferried across, accompanied by his sons and amanuensis, to the Najibiyya Gardens. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, forgive me. Najibiyya Garden, situated on the opposite shore. "O my companions," he thus addressed the faithful band that surrounded him before he embarked, "I entrust to your keeping the city of Baghdad in the state ye now behold it, when from the eyes of friends and strangers alike, crowding its housetops, its streets and markets, tears like the rain of spring are flowing down, and I depart. With you it now rests to watch, lest your deeds and conduct dim the flame of love that gloweth within the breast of its inhabitants." Now, remember, even though this is the beginning of this 12-day period of announcing his station. It is not the beginning of his revelation. Don't forget, he has been revealing works even in the Sia Chow. So a full 10 years, he has been revealing the works of his revelation. And also don't forget to recall something we mentioned a couple of classes ago, that it was at the beseeching of the Bab in his own writing that he asked that even though Baha'u'llah would, or him whom God would make manifest, would appear or become manifest in the year 9, which would be 9 plus 1844, 1853, when he was in the Sia Chow, when Baha'u'llah was in the Sia Chow, that for the sake of his loved ones, the Bab requested, would he delay for 9 years? And that's what he has done. So the entering of the garden, the muezzin had just raised the afternoon call to prayer when Baha'u'llah entered the Najib Beya garden. One of our Persian friends can, after the class, give me the correct pronunciation, where he tarried 12 days before his final departure from the city. There his friends and companions, arriving in successive ways, attained his presence and bade him farewell, bade him with feelings of profound sorrow their last farewell. Outstanding among them was the renowned Alusi, the Mufti of Baghdad, who with eyes dimmed with tears execrated the name of Nasiruddin Shah, whom he deemed to be primarily responsible for so unmerited a banishment. Of course, he was. It was he who sent the request to the Sultan to have Baha'u'llah removed further from Persia. I have ceased to regard him, he openly asserted, as Nasiruddin, the helper of the faith, but consider him rather to be its wrecker. The visit of the governor to the gardens. Another distinguished visitor was the governor himself, Namik Pasha, who, after expressing in most respectful terms his regret at the developments which had precipitated Baha'u'llah's departure and assuring him of his readiness to aid him in any way he could, handed to the officer appointed to accompany him a written order. Now, this is repeating what we've already read about offering whatever assistance he needed. This is the one description you probably read, those of you who have commemorated this festival, about the description of what it was like. Even though we don't have much detail, this is one description of what detail we do have. Every day, Nabil has related, ere the hour of dawn, the gardeners would pick the roses which lined the 4 avenues of the garden and would pile them in the center of the floor of his blessed tent. So great would be the heap that when his companions gathered to drink their morning tea in his presence, they would be unable to see each other across it. All these roses Baha'u'llah would, with his own hands, entrust to those whom he dismissed from his presence every morning to be delivered on his behalf to his Arab and Persian friends in the city. One night, he continues, the 9th night of the waxing moon, I happened to be one of those who watched beside his blessed tent. As the hour of midnight approached, I saw him issue from his tent, pass by the places where some of his companions were sleeping, and began to pace up and down the moonlit, flower-bordered avenues of the garden. And this is a continuation of that same description. So loud was the singing of the nightingales on every side that only those who were near him could hear distinctly his voice. He continued to walk until, pausing in the midst of one of those avenues, he observed, "Consider these nightingales. So great is their love for these roses that sleepless from dusk till dawn, they warble their melodies and commune with burning passion with the object of their adoration. How then can those who claim to be afire with the rose-like beauty of the beloved choose to sleep? For 3 successive nights, I watched and circled round his blessed tent. Every time I passed by the couch whereon he lay, I would find him wakeful, and every day from morn till eventide, I would see him ceaselessly engaged in conversing with the stream of visitors who kept flowing in from Baghdad. Not once could I discover in the words he spoke any trace of dissimulation. So, this is a description by the Guardian of the meaning or purpose of this event. As to the significance of that declaration, now, one thing before I go on that's very important, and I'll show this later to you, these quotes here from these 2 paragraphs is the first paragraph and the last paragraph, as you see here, of these pages here, the 8 pages of a text by Baha'u'llah, a tablet by Baha'u'llah. It's number 14 in the Gleanings. So for 8 pages of this 8-page tablet, he talks about the importance and nature of this event. The divine springtime has come, O most exalted pen, for the festival of the all-merciful is fast approaching. Bestir thyself and magnify before the entire creation the name of God, and celebrate his praise in such wise that all created things may be regenerated and made new. And so on. And it goes on like that for 8 pages. It's magnificent. And this was one of the things I had not known before. And I realized it because it is cited by Bahá'u'lláh in his work, where he says that that this particular tablet is Baha'u'llah's description of that festival. So let's go back and read the Guardian's description of the significance of this milestone event. As to the significance of that declaration, let Baha'u'llah, and here he quotes, some of this is from that tablet, and some of it from other statements by Baha'u'llah, but the Guardian, in his inimical way, splices together these quotes so beautifully that it's well worth our looking at the particular passages he chooses to describe the significance of this event. As to the significance of that declaration, let Baha'u'llah himself reveal to us its import, acclaiming that historic occasion as the most great festival, the king of festivals, the festival of God. He has, in his Kitab-i-Aqdas, characterized it as the day whereon all created things were immersed in the sea of purification. While in one of his specific tablets, he has referred to it as the day whereon the breezes of forgiveness were wafted over the entire creation. Sounds a lot like the way Christians view the coming of Christ, as for the forgiveness of sins. He dying, giving his life up for the salvation of humankind. Rejoice with exceeding gladness, O people of Baha. He in another tablet has written, as ye call to remembrance the day of supreme felicity, the day whereon the tongue of the Ancient of Days hath spoken, as he departed from his house, proceeding to the spot from which he shed upon the whole of creation the splendors of his name, the All-Merciful. Were we to reveal the hidden secrets of that day, all that dwell on earth and in the heavens would swoon away and die, except such as will be preserved by God, the Almighty, the All-Knowing, the All-Wise. Such is the inebriating effect of the words of God upon the revealer of his undoubted proofs, that his pen can move no longer. And again, this is another quote from Baha'u'llah. The divine springtime has come, O most exalted pen, and this is from that tablet that I just showed you. For the festival of the All-Merciful is fast approaching. The day star of blissfulness shineth upon the horizon of our name, the blissful, inasmuch as the kingdom of the name of God hath been adorned with the ornament of the name of thy Lord, the creator of the heavens. Take heed lest anything deter thee from extolling the greatness of this day, the day whereon the finger of majesty and power hath opened the seal of the wine of reunion, and called all who are in the heavens and all who are on the earth. This is the day whereon the unseen world crieth out, great is thy blessedness, O earth, for thou hast been made the footstool of thy God, and been chosen as the seat of his mighty throne. Say, he it is who hath laid bare before you the hidden and treasured gem, were you to seek it. He it is who is the one beloved of all things, whether of the past or of the future. And yet again, arise and proclaim unto the entire creation the tidings that he who is the all-merciful hath directed his steps towards the Ridvan and entered it. Guide then the people into the garden of delight, which God hath made the throne of his paradise. Within this paradise, and from the heights of its loftiest chambers, the maids of heaven have cried out and shouted, rejoice, ye dwellers of the realms above, for the fingers of him who is the Ancient of Days are ringing. In the name of the all-glorious, the most great bell. Now that didn't read that well, but the fingers are ringing the most great bell in the midmost heart of the heavens. The hands of bounty have borne round the cups of everlasting life. Approach and quaff your fill. And finally, forget the world of creation, O pen, and turn thou towards the face of thy Lord, the Lord of all names. Adorn then the world with the ornament of the favors of thy Lord, the King of everlasting days. For we perceive the fragrance of the day whereon he who is the desire of all nations hath shed upon the kingdoms of the unseen and of the seen the splendors of the light of his most excellent names, and enveloped them with the radiance of the luminaries of his most gracious favors. Favors which none can reckon except him who is the omnipotent protector of the entire creation. So those are the excerpts, some from this tablet here, the 9, I said it was 8 pages, it's actually 9 pages, of which this is the beginning paragraph and the ending paragraph. And you'll recognize here some of the things I just read. So I admonish you, especially when the Ridvan festival arrives, to go to this tablet and as part of your commemoration and read it and see what Baha'u'llah has to say about the import of it. So what is the second of the 3 holy days? On the 9th day, the family of Baha'u'llah also moved to the Najibiyah Gardens, and the 12th day was appointed for departure. So this is significance. The first day he arrives, the 9th day the family arrives, the 12th day he leaves. Thus the festival of Ridvan comprises 12 days. Throughout the 12th day, people poured into the garden for their final farewells. At last the mules were loaded. The howdahs are kajave. Again, I'll ask our Persian friends to help me with the pronunciation, were settled on them. The ladies and children took their seats in the howdahs, and towards sunset, the red-roan stallion was brought out for Baha'u'llah to mount. Now, this is something else that I had misunderstood, and that is I thought that Baha'u'llah went back to his house and left from there so that the people bowed in front of him as he rode, as he mounted this beautiful horse and rode it away from the gardens. But he left on the journey from the garden itself and departed on the journey, did not go back to Baghdad or his house. All those whose narratives have come down to us state that seeing Baha'u'llah in the saddle and about to depart, evoked from the vast crowd heart-rending, unbearable cries of distress. The call, Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest, rang out time and again. Now remember, Allahu has not yet become call of the Baha'is, because that is something that's introduced in Adrianople. So they utilize the same prayer that is part of the Islamic tradition. It means the same thing. People threw themselves in the path of his horse. As Akarita expresses it, it seemed as if that heavenly steed was passing over sanctified bodies and pure hearts. On that day, for the first time, they witnessed Baha'u'llah's splendid horsemanship. This may be something you didn't know. It was something I had forgotten. During all those years in Baghdad, although horses were never unavailable, Akarita states that Baha'u'llah had always chosen to ride a donkey. Another symbolic sign of the divine authority that he now visibly wielded was the change in his headgear on the first day of the Festival of Ridvan, the day he left his house in Baghdad for the last time to take his residence in the Najibi prior to his departure for the capital. Najibiye?
Yes.
Thank you. Very good. You should have come in earlier. Prior to his departure for the capital of the Turkish Empire. It was then seen that he was wearing a taj, finely embroidered. A number of these tall felt headgears have been preserved. And of course, if you see a picture of Baha'u'llah's bed at Baji, you see one of those placed on the bed. Red, green, yellow, and white, beautifully adorned with embroidery of the highest quality and skill. This is a quote from Balyuzi, Najibiye. Going to try to get it. The worldwide reverberations. Now, this is something we could talk about at great length, how the world went through such incredible, vast change, the Industrial Revolution, the dying of empires, the overthrowing of kingdoms. One that I simply chose as just one simple representation. It's not simple at all. It still is waiting to be carried out in one sense. But one of them is around the same time. This is, of course, prior to that, since about 6 months prior to it. On September the 22nd, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that as of January the 1st, 1863, all enslaved people in the states currently engaged in rebellion against the Union shall be thenceforward and forever free. By the end of January 1865, both houses of Congress had passed the 13th Amendment, and it was ratified that December. It is the greatest and most enduring contribution to the history of the war, Lincoln said of emancipation in February 1865, 2 months before his assassination. It is, in fact, the central act of my administration and the great event of the 19th century. So again, such activity that every least pebble is revitalized and revived. If you recall, way back when we were studying the very first part of the Declaration of the Bab, there are in the Quranic traditions, in the Quran and in the Hadith, a statement that there are, of course, two trumpet blasts, one which represents the Declaration of the Bab, the other which represents the Declaration of Baha'u'llah. But there also a tradition dealing with the fact that the first trumpet blast would dumbfound the peoples of the world. They would be stunned. They wouldn't know what was going on. They'd be in a state of confusion. They would be struck dumb. Whereas the second blast would revive them, would bring them back to life, the dry bones, the dead bones, the flecks of dust, as they're sometimes alluded to in the poetry.